Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you as always from the CHEK News World Headquarters in Victoria. The fall session of the legislature over. The NDP government have passed enormous changes to housing policy. We will dive into that and take a look at how the parties and party leaders performed and what the challenges ahead are for them. So, to do that, we bring in the pod squad you know and love each and every week. Love is a strong word. Respect each and every week. Maybe, I love Jeff's beard, but...
Tolerates right here. Tolerate me.
Yes, that's right. Allie Blades, Jillian Oliver, and Jeff Ferrier are here as always. We will thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone for watching and listening. Jump into the legislative session, dominated by housing, 5 bills by the Premier. I think he delivers probably, the biggest housing reforms in a generation. In short, BC has banned most short-term rentals, upzoned single-family lots to multiplexes, greenlit 10 to 20-story towers around transit hubs, legalized secondary suites province-wide, and banned public hearings on rezonings already allowed under official community plans, which, that's a lot of stuff. And then within each of those, there are little details and pros and cons and some criticism, some praise. So we'll just start on housing, a generational change. Jillian, how do you think all of this kind of coalesced and landed and is resonating with the public?
I think broad strokes, the government accomplished its main goal of what it set out to do, to really show that they are doing a lot and taking the issue seriously and trying to take action. I've heard that from lots of people. That's sort of the sense that they got from the government recently. And I think that if the government had one thing they wanted to come out with, that would be it. As always, with big pieces of legislation like this, the devil's in the details. Some of the legislation is more controversial than others. I think the short-term rentals, the transit-oriented development pieces, that one got unanimous support. Not too much to flag there. Some people concerned that we might see, some renovictions around those transit sites. That's something that already happens with density increases. So, maybe that's the one thing that could come out of that one. The biggest one, Bill 44, which is the bill that changes zoning across the provinces. So single family homes going to a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 6 units each, a whole bunch of other changes. That's the one that was more controversial. The opposition parties didn't support, and the government was in the news for having shut down debate at the end. Because the debate was shut down, we don't know a lot of the ramifications. It's unclear. Is this going to drive land prices up? That was, one of the main concerns of the opposition, why they didn't support it. The government says that they have analysis that it's actually going to drive prices down 7 to 14%. However, they declined to release the analysis, and the experts who consulted on that are under NDAs and can't comment on it. So we also have seen in other jurisdictions like Auckland, where they've put in similar legislation, that we have seen increases in house prices. So I think that's the biggest potential controversy coming out of this legislation. However, it's going to be a while before we see what happens, because it doesn't come into force until next July.
Yeah, there's a lot of those kind of both details and implications that either the government doesn't know or does know and isn't willing to say quite yet. Jeff, the praise and criticism, praise for doing a lot here, taking a big swing. Some criticism, former NDP Premier Mike Harcourt, some mayors saying takes away a lot of their local planning power. The pros and cons of how that's sort of resonating with the public in its entirety. What do you think?
Well, the first thing I want to say is to my fellow British Columbians, our long provincial nightmare is over. The legislative session is over for 2024. You don't have to worry about seeing question period stuff on your TV feeds. Enjoy your time with your family. It's coming back in February, and it'll be here before you know it. I think that on the housing, the question you raised, the dynamic that's really interesting to me is the issue here of, you talked about generational change. This is generational change. And by that, I mean what we're seeing from Premier Eby and his government, in my view, is the first BC government where the boomers are taking a backseat to Generation X and beyond. So if Christy Clark and John Horgan were Captain Kirk, David Eby is Jean-Luc Picard, government, the next generation. There's my bad TV reference for the show. But you see it on housing, right? You see it in all the parties, and you referenced it. You've got government getting pushback from some of the folks who've been in BC United for a long time, Shirley Bond, getting pushback from young people in the party saying, no, the issue here is housing for us. We can't afford it. We can't find it. It's our future. You see it from NDP politicians from the 1990s. You referenced Mike Harcourt pushing back, saying this is going to obliterate carefully thought out community plans that have been around for decades. Well, those plans are what have the next generation not able to find housing, not being able to afford housing, and despairing for their future. And it's interesting to me that you have David Eby. Government has been controlled by boomer, taking care of boomers for so long. And now we're seeing that the new generation, the younger generation, and it cuts across all parties, finally seeing, certainly in this housing legislation, a government that is focused on their generation.
It is, I totally agree with a lot of your points there. I will say Adam Olsen mounted a pretty good sort of counter argument to that during the session, saying that we're giving a lot of people with wealth more wealth with this legislation. You own one home on a single family lot, well, congratulations, you now own 4 potentially. And that entrenches, I think, some of the wealth. It was his argument, that intergenerational wealth. We know it's easier to get into housing if you have family who are already into housing. And to that extent, I think there is some criticism that it's going to help the boomers even more, because if you can't help them, they're not going to do anything to help the next generation. So I don't know, Allie, lots of really interesting arguments about not just the legislation, but about the larger housing market as well, and how this all works.
Yeah, we're talking about this in a significant way, and our government, rightfully so, is talking about this in a big way and making big changes, because the unaffordability of housing is insane. We're the 3rd most unaffordable city in North America as it relates to income as well. And Rob, you're totally right. Like, unless your parents are giving you the down payment to your house, how are you getting a house in Vancouver and in big cities across BC? Now, Jillian, your summary was absolutely spot on. And, you mentioned the devil in the details. I was chatting with a UBC professor not too long ago, and we were talking about the transit-oriented density component of the bill. And he mentioned that one of the details missing was the affordability once you start building those. And that those are those details that we didn't get to talk about because these were just rammed through in the last little bit of session, which is a bigger conversation of being an undemocratic process. But those are the things that we could have talked about, but we didn't get an opportunity to. So this is a government that puts a lot forward. And I respect that and appreciate that, because we have big problems and we need to fix them fast. We don't have the luxury of time, but they're not well thought out. So what's going to end up happening is that they're going to be put in place, the implementation of it all, but it may or may not work. We don't really know. And then again, going back to the point where we didn't really get a chance to debate it. But I respect the fact that we needed to get it across the finish line in order to make a difference at all, especially with the fact that there is an election coming up in 2024.
Mm-hmm. I think the NDP's argument is better to do something than nothing, and let's give this a shot. But you're right. Like, is it possible that all of this housing legislation essentially just creates more unaffordable luxury condos around transit buildings, or more unaffordable duplexes or triplexes on single-family lots? We don't know. The government has some modeling, hasn't released it, won't release it, saying maybe not, but it is, I think, up in the air. That's the contents, such as they are, of the housing bills. But the larger legislative session, the debate on this time allocation, ramming these things into law, where is the BC United housing plan, which I thought we would have seen. The Conservatives are doing a whole bunch of stuff for the first time over here. The carbon tax is in play. The Greens lost their deputy leader, but I think did a pretty good job debating things. You put it all together. What jumped out at you about the fall legislative session in terms of kind of importance of where everything stands?
Well, if you rewind a few episodes back, more than a few, when we talked about our predictions about the session coming up, I did say that it would be foolish for the BC United not to come up with a housing strategy, considering it's such a big component of what people are dealing with when it comes to unaffordability. Like, that's peak unaffordability, is not being able to buy into the housing market. And there are reasons for that, financial stability, and all of those fun things, those luxurious things. Well, we didn't really see opposition this session, though, when it comes to that. So fingers crossed, and I'm really hopeful that this comes next session. I will give them credit in that they did put forward some ideas in affordability generally, but not specifically on housing, which in my opinion is a mistake, considering now that the NDP are completely monopolizing the conversation in this important policy in a really good way. Like, we saw headlines of Canadian leaders and historic bills being passed. So they're just sucking all the air on this one issue, and we're not seeing opposition really oppose anything in a significant way. Their arguments on short-term rentals with Airbnb and others like it didn't really land or resonate with a lot of people, despite their trying very hard. So that's my one piece that I'm really upset that we didn't really see that from BC United or the Conservatives or the Greens a little bit, but they're just getting away with it now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought we would see a BC United housing plan. It allows the NDP, like you said, to, and we talked about this the other week, craft this narrative of homes are for people, not for investors. And anything you say that criticizes one of their bills puts you in this enemy camp of fighting for investors and not for people. You want to add something or take away something or critique something. And I think United could have maybe countered that a little bit if they had their own plan to come up with. Jillian, Conservatives, United, Greens, the session, that kind of bun fight over time, what jumped out at you?
Well, I think, all of the parties sort of had highs and lows. Like I said, the government, I think, accomplished their main goal of looking to do lots on housing, but they also appeared messy at times, having to stand down bills and amend them. The finance minister saying that she consulted with local governments when she hadn't, the housing minister saying he consulted with opposition when he hadn't, and some kind of sloppiness that comes with, the territory when you're trying to do so much in a short amount of time. I think, for the Greens, like you mentioned, weathered a bit of a storm with their deputy leader, but pivoted really quickly. Both their MLAs are really, substantial, capable legislators, and were able to kind of get back on their feet and talk about the issues. They put out some of their own good ideas, like a ban on fossil fuel advertising and a major overhaul to child welfare, that I think shows that they are still differentiating from the other parties, still have unique ideas and are carving out their own space. United, probably their biggest success was getting the government on the run on the public safety file a little bit. I think they were really able to put enough political pressure on the government to kind of force their point of view to stop the progression of drug policy and drug liberalization policy. I think that raises maybe some political issues for the NDP on the left, but, Allie kind of covered them there. Conservatives, I think, they came in with a big bang and they were so novel at the beginning of the session, but have sort of by the end ended up as this sort of bit of a sideshow. I think they really need to get serious if they're going to maintain any of their momentum and not lose support, because I think they said a few things, more than a few things this session that are going to come back to bite them in an election, that for just appearing too extreme and kind of a little bit out to lunch.
Mm-hmm. You are right. And we'd forgotten, I think, because housing is dominated for so long, that there was a part of this session on drug policy, on crime, on addictions policy that the BC United Party owned, I think. And you're right. They did push the NDP quite hard. And although New Democrats will never admit it, I think we're slightly more in line with the public sentiment than some of the stuff the NDP was advancing in those areas. Jeff, let's bring you in. Spar with you for a second. I know.
Sparring? I'm sitting here being nice, just hoping to have a nice conversation with you.
Just
okay, we're going to spar.
Two amigos. I know the argument from some New Democrats, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here, but some New Democrats say, well, who cares about the stupid legislature? You know, we're just trying to get things done. Doesn't matter if we shut down debate, like our critics used to do to us and we used to say was undemocratic. We're just trying to get things into action. I know most people don't care, but if you're watching this show, you probably do care about the legislature and the democratic process. So how do we reconcile the progress the NDP made and the kind of, and I will put words in my own mouth here, abuse of the system that they managed to get to shut things down. We had entire sections of major bills go undebated. That's not good. It doesn't matter who's in government. It's just not good. So how do we reconcile all that, do you think?
Okay, so I get where you're coming from. And I think it's right that most folks at home, this isn't, if the debate is, am I going to get more housing for people quicker? Or is the process being followed correctly at the legislature? In times like these, they'll go for the housing quicker. I know you'll point out that the NDP talked about time allocation. For folks at home or listening who don't know what that is, it's when the government says, we're getting close to the end of the session, we've debated enough, even if the opposition thinks we haven't debated enough, we're going to bring it to a vote and make a decision. And so that happened here before the opposition was felt like it was done debating the issues. I will point out in terms of have we debated these issues enough? The Premier flagged in the spring that this was the direction that the government was going to take. He made this clear at the beginning of the session. There was substantive debate in the House, not as much as the opposition would want, but there was substantive debate on the legislation. And there is an ongoing process after legislation is passed for work on the regulation, which is the rules that make the law more real, and and outline exactly how it's going to work. We talk about devil in the details. These are the details. So that work is going on as well. And if you're an enterprising opposition member and you want to influence how this is all going to roll out and make sure that your constituents' voices are heard, you're making phone calls into housing, you're identifying the people who are leading this on the public service side, you're meeting with the minister and saying, make sure that you get this, and this into the rules and the regulations so that it will work well, instead of complaining about time allocation. Mm-hmm. So that's my response to the sparring.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of good points there. I would say I think the NDP could have done themselves a favor here if they had just introduced all this housing legislation at the start of the session and let it go up for debate. Why do you bring in your marquee bills halfway through the 2 months and then delay debating them till the last minute? There's only 4.5 hours on the transit bill in terms of committee debate, and then you jam it out and say, well, the opposition's kind of whining. I don't think this was a very good legislative
unanimous support. Why should you debate anything if everyone agrees on it?
Yes, there is that point too. They did agree on the transit bill, so that's fair enough. But I think we could have handled it a little bit. The Premier says, he's open to ideas. Here's an idea. Bring in your legislation at the start of a session, and then you don't end up in the jam perhaps at the end. But anyways, Jeff, just to stay with you, to give you a fair chance, because we were sparring on that issue, did anything else jump out at you from the session on the Conservatives, the Greens, United, where everyone else stands?
I'm going to do what Allie did, and I'm going to go back to that prediction show that we did a while ago. I predicted 3 things, and I think with some variation, they all played out. Focus was on housing. We spent the whole show talking about it. It was the big issue. We've seen an avalanche of new government laws in action on housing, so that the focus was there. Predicted that the session would see the opposition parties hobbled because they would be fighting each other to jockey for position, to be seen as the chief opponent to the NDP in the upcoming general election. That is absolutely what played out this session. John Rustad announcing something, Kevin Falcon right afterwards, if not announcing the same thing, moving really, really quickly to address the same issue in his own way. So the focus wasn't on putting forward a housing plan. They didn't have the resources or the focus to be able to do that because they were too busy fighting the Conservatives, who I don't like what they stand for. I don't like what they're saying. There's a lot of dangerous things that they're saying, particularly on climate and SOGI. But they're in second place in almost every public opinion poll right now. So that dynamic was happening. It was distracting, and it was a sideshow to the substantive work of the legislature. And oldie but a goodie, David Eby, when he became premier, said he wanted to be a man of action. This session, I think, it really landed with the public. Whether you agree with them or you don't, whether you're concerned about the legislation and what's in it or not, the guy is doing the work. He's getting things done. He's not a guy who makes speeches, mouths the words, and then doesn't follow up like some prime ministers. He's actually getting deep into the policy and moving things forward. We'll see how that all plays out. Allie and Jillian has always made good points on there are unintended consequences that will need to be managed. But he's doing the stuff. And so that branding of him that he wants to brand worked. And so that's what stood out for me.
Yeah, no, there's definitely that. Allie, just give me 30 quick seconds on the Conservatives. And, they did have some wild extreme positions on some things, but they also became one of the only ones to promise scrapping the carbon tax, which I think resonated a lot larger than a lot of us thought it was going to do. So what did you make of that?
The beauty of the BC Conservatives is that they only have 2 members. So their agility to be able to make decisions is just a quick phone call with one another. So some will say that that's a good thing, but others will say that that's rash decision making. So I think that we're seeing them respond to a lot of things faster than anyone else because it's just 2 dudes. And not a whole lot of resources behind them. It's not like they have a giant production behind them either. They just started out. I think that that's going to change in the new year for sure. But it really is just the both of them, and they tend to agree on a lot of things too. So I don't see a lot of internal conflict amongst these 2.
Just 2 dudes and 2 barbecue chickens making policy for the BC Conservatives. All right. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching. If you're watching us on YouTube or CHEK TV, subscribe to the podcast because we have some more discussion today on the other political parties and BC United fundraising as well. We will be back next week with all the latest on BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.